Welcome to the Identity at the Center podcast. I'm Jeff, and that's Jim. Hey, Jim.
Hey, Jeff, how are you?
Oh, not so bad. Yourself?
I'm good. So, to prove what you often tell people, Jim's going to hit me with something. I have no idea what it's going to be. I'm going to ask you a very simple question. What year did the SolarWinds breach happen?
SolarWinds. Which one? I don't know. I feel like it feels like yesterday, but you're going to probably tell me something. I was like, oh, that was like 4 years ago or 5 years ago.
2020.
Yeah.
That was, so I was working on it with my boss. So our day jobs, right? We work for RSM, we do consulting. And our digital identity is part of the risk consulting practice, right? And so we're working on a risk consulting deck, and he asked me, hey, what's one of the big breaches that stands out from a risk consulting standpoint in cyber? I said, well, it has to be SolarWinds, right? And I started doing a Google search. I couldn't remember even the name SolarWinds, right? I'm like, it's that big one. And I started looking at 2023. What was the big breaches? 2024. And I'm like, I finally got there by keyword jamming, and eventually I was like, realized it was 2020. I remember we had Paul Voloshin come on at the time. This was at the very beginning of the pandemic, right? And we decided like, hey, we need to put out an emergency episode. This humongous breach just happened. And Paul was like, hey, I can talk about it on a Sunday. So I went on, I think I did this. That was probably my first solo episode was with Paul and on that topic. So it just came to mind because I was also thinking about like, hey, we've got Identiverse coming up. That's in Las Vegas, right? That was the big Scatter Spider breach, which I had to go back and check the date. That was 2023. That was obviously more recent, more in kind of the recent episode log. So if you go back, we had a couple episodes dedicated to Scatter Spider over time. But I just thought it was interesting. It's like some of these breaches, they are the biggest deal ever. We're in this news cycle now where things become the biggest deal ever, and then something else becomes the biggest deal. You move on, and eventually you forget when the last thing happened.
Well, we're desensitized because it happens so often. It's like, okay, what are we going to do about it this time? Some are bigger than others, obviously, but I appreciate you living up to your Debbie Downer of, hey, let's start off an episode with, hey, let's talk massive breaches and all the things that can go wrong and things like that. So you're definitely, you hit a home run on that one.
Hey, wait till the later note. I got some really good stuff planned for that.
Well, remember, it's a lighter note. It's supposed to be fun, airy, carefree.
Hey, what I found is when I am airy and carefree, then you become Debbie Downer. So the universe has to balance itself out. But
well, as Thanos once said, balance in all things, right? So
yeah, again, you have to educate me on who that even is. But coming up, we've got Identiverse conference. We're going to talk about it today. We've got a discount code still for that. I kind of feel nostalgic. This is the last episode where we're going to talk about the Identiverse conference and our discount code. Then we'll shift into kind of the fall conferences. But I'm excited about it at Identiverse. We're going to have a booth. We're going to do our game show. We've got a bunch of other things. We're going to record a bunch of episodes. What else do we have? What are your thoughts?
I mean, I think you hit kind of everything that we've got going on. So yeah, this is going to go live a week before the actual conference. So if you haven't registered already, here's 30% off for you if you use the code IDV26-IDAC30 and the percentage sign. It's on our website, idacpodcast.com, so you don't have to kind of jot it down. But yeah, time's ticking. I'm going to guess the Mandalay is probably sold out or very high from a rate perspective. But hopefully we'll see a lot of familiar faces there for the conference itself. And, this is also extended to all of our friends at IDPro for sure. So we also have kind of a recent discount that we're finally able to get in place with the help of IDPro. If you go to idpro.org/IDAC, all new members get $25 off for their first year, which is very cool. So people can check that out. Jim, I don't know if you know that I did this, but in an episode that we aired, I guess at this point, a couple weeks ago, I used AI to insert the IDAC discount information, because when we recorded with Elizabeth, we didn't have it kind of worked out and finalized at that point, so we weren't quite sure what to put there. But I actually used AI to animate my headshot and the voice of AI Jeff to, say, okay, well, if you're going to hear it, here it is, and then it kind of cuts to it. I'm guessing you have not seen that yet.
I didn't know. That's freaking cool, though.
Well, as we were talking about before we hit record, I have shifted I'm trying to shift my thinking and my speaking to saying AI good or bad, or if it's this good or this bad, and just say capable, because it is certainly becoming much more capable all the time. And I'm sure that's going to be a big topic that we talk about at Identiverse. But why don't we go ahead and get to our guests? Two of the finest in the IM industry. They've been on multiple times, a total of 13 between the two of them. We've got Heather Flanagan. She's the content chair, and Andi Hindle, who is the conference chair, and we're going to find out what that means. They're both part of the team that's helping put together the Identiverse conference itself. But welcome to the show, Heather and Andi.
Hello again.
Greetings. It's a pleasure to be here as always.
And Heather, I notice your cat sitting behind you. We have some supervision this time. We'll see how that goes.
Yes,
Any
Chaucer.
comments?
I've already exhausted him.
Well, Chaucer is free to pipe in at any point. She's going to be the fact checker maybe for you as you're kind of talking. But let's start with the roles that you guys are playing at the conference. You guys have done this before as well, but for people who aren't familiar, and Heather, I want to kind of start with you. What is the difference? Explain your role as a content chair, and then Andi, you go next and talk about, okay, how does that differ from a conference chair?
Mm-hmm. So for content chair, it basically means that I'm responsible for the results from the CFP in organizing the content committee and making sure that things are reviewed and making sure that we have a whole lot of stuff in our back pocket, as it were, because what we find is, we get hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of proposals, which is great. But then sometimes people will be like, oh, sorry, we didn't remember what days the conference were, so we have to pull out. Or, okay, but we're only going to speak if you pay us money. And so they pull out. And so there's this churn that happens over the course of the few months after you actually start picking things. This year was a little bit more character building than expected, because we had to, the woman who was responsible for, she was going to be handling the content and the process and all of that stuff. Her name was Chris Tanaka, and she unexpectedly passed away at the very end of 2025, at which point we were kind of plan B, except they didn't know they even needed a plan B. So we just sort of dove on it and picked things up from there to make sure that everything continued to go and the conference actually happened on time. But that's my focus is the content. However, there's so much more that happens, and that's Andi's job.
Yeah, it's unfortunate to hear about Chris, just because we
really
met her
is.
for the first time in I think it was DC last year, and one of our first times that we did kind of the game show in that sort of smaller format for that conference, and she was such a pleasure to work with, and sorry to have to hear that news over the break, but anyway, Andi, tell us about being a conference chair.
Yeah. So what's interesting about this is if you go back far enough, I've been around doing this for a little while now. This is actually going to be my 12th year, if I've added the years up correctly, of being roughly in this role. But when I first took it on, Andre Durand, who obviously founded Identiverse way back, was in the role of conference chair. And so I took on specifically the content and then slowly moved in and effectively looked after both of them. The role of conference chair is, I guess, about the overall direction of the conference. So I'm thinking about how does everything tie together thematically? What are the big topics that we need to try and touch on? How do we make sure that we have stitched together at least a reasonable story through the main stage through the week? And I'm hedging a little bit on that because we don't always know exactly what's going to be said on the main stage until sometimes just a few weeks out. Some of it's locked in, some of it, changes as we get a little closer. And so there's a certain amount of real-time work that goes into that as well to try and kind of tell the story through the week. And some of that is about literally telling the story through the week so that you have some consistency as you go through, some sense of progression from A to B. But we're also thinking about where might we want to go next year, right? And so, it's impossible to predict exactly what that's going to look like, but at least directionally, we're already starting to have some conversations and have some thoughts around, okay, here are some directions we might want to lean into for next year. Let's maybe test some of those out in real time, see how people respond to them or react to them. And all of that goes into helping inform getting us set up for the call for presentations for the 27 conference, which of course will open, that the CFP for 27 will open in October, which means that we need to start thinking about what are the things we're going to want to directionally talk about by then. So that's the role of the conference chair really is kind of the broad picture. But it's impossible to do that without this really strong kind of content from the CFP sort of holding everything together underneath. And so that's why these two things fit together so well.
So let's talk a little bit about that theme for this year. Can I guess that there's going to be some sort of AI as part of this, just because it seems like it's taken over sort of the mind share for so many people? But maybe I can, Andi, start with you. Let's talk about that theme, and then Heather, if you've got anything you want to add on, feel free.
Yeah. So, themes for conferences are always tricky because on the one hand, you do want to give people some structure, some context in which to kind of think about the week. By the same token, if you focus on one thing, then everyone just wants to talk about that one thing, right? And again, because it informs the CFP, the call presentations, the last thing you want to do is to just end up with 400 proposals about AI and nothing else. So we actually hinted a little bit at this last year for listeners who might have attended last year. We talked quite a lot about fragility. We talked quite a lot about these four big kind of technical developments that are happening, which, again, going back to last year, AI, continuous identity, personal identity, and someone's going to remind me what the fourth one was. And no one's going to remind me what the fourth one was. Oh, well, somebody can go and look it up afterwards. And the point that we made that identity really acts as a substrate, right? It pulls everything together. It helps us deal with that fragility. And the reason that we talked about that partly was because it was very true last year. It continues to be true. And so this year we're talking about really two things. One is that exactly that line of thinking, right? And it's increasingly the case that our digital identity systems are absolutely fundamental to building trust. And it's trust that allows us to get work done in the digital world, right? I mean, it's kind of fundamental to how everything works. At the same time, there's an awful lot of change going on, and so there's as a result of that a lot of uncertainty for digital identity professionals. There's also a huge amount of innovation that's happening. And knowing when this episode is going to go out, I can hint at least a little bit at some of my opening remarks. So, if you go back again to the very beginning of Identiverse, when it used to be Cloud Identity Summit, one of the reasons that Cloud Identity Summit, that Andre originally set up the conference, was because at the time, and this was just when cloud computing was becoming a thing, right? And we didn't know as an industry, as in a profession, we didn't know how to do identity in the cloud, really. And so part of the point of Cloud Identity Summit was to answer that question. Well, here we are 15 some years later, and there's sufficient change going on, particularly around agentic AI specifically, but there's a bunch of other stuff too. And we're all sat here kind of asking the same question, which is, how do we do identity now, right? The good news is that there's a lot more of us to kind of help answer that question, right? So that's, contextually some of the stuff that we'll start talking about, I think, this year. And then what we've started to see through the CFP gives some meat to all of that. And I'm going to let Heather talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, because that was one of the things that I guess one of the first things I did was when the CFP opened, there was, we have different tracks, and one of the tracks was AI and identity. And I took a look at what came in and I thought about it and I ripped the track apart because that it didn't make sense. AI isn't a vertical. It isn't its own thing. It's always AI in the context of something else. AI and how it's impacting security, AI and how it's impacting the business, AI and how it's impacting privacy, all of which were other tracks we had. So, and unfortunately, about easily anywhere somewhere between a third and a half of the submissions that came in under that AI category. So I ended up recategorizing a whole bunch of different things because, again, they didn't make sense because they weren't about AI. They were about something else and how you could use AI with that. So that's, I think, an interesting trend and concept for the industry to be thinking about. The fact that, AI, while it's certainly taking over our conversations and influencing what we do, there's still what we do, right? We're still doing identity verification and proofing. We're still working on security. We're still doing all of these things. This is just a tool that's making, all the things go faster. Not better, just faster.
I think there's a growing sense that identity is at the center, not to toot our own horn, but it's at the center of all these things like agentic systems and wallets and kind of automation in general, machines, workloads. How is this affecting like that thought? And you hear it a lot in terms of this catchphrase I keep hearing, identity is the control plane, which is generally, I think, the way I interpret that is like you're using identity now to secure systems rather than just depending on external controls, things like that. So first, correct me in terms of like that statement I just made, but then also, because I see you guys shaking your head no. So that's great. This is what this show is all about, is educating people, including me and Jeff. But also talk about that, how that concept affects the theme of this year's conference.
My gosh, I have such opinions. But Andi, you go first, because I got a soapbox right here and I'm about to hop on it.
So yeah, you're right, Jim, in the sense that phrase gets thrown around a lot, right? The identity is the control plane, and it's not unreasonable. It's just, for me, it doesn't go far enough because it gets us back into that mode of saying identity is all about security. Security is very important. Don't get me wrong, but identity is also about enablement. It's about making stuff possible. And so I actually like to think of it as the enablement plane and not the control plane, right? It's really important that we don't forget that. And there are lots of things in the identity space that actually have nothing really to do with control in that sense, right? They give us control in other ways. But that isn't really what people mean when they say it. So that's why I'm stood here shaking my head. Is it feels very reductive to be saying identity is the control plane. It's so much more than that.
And so one of the things I do in my copious free time is I write blog posts. I like writing blog posts. And I wrote one this week that said, identity systems don't make decisions. They are part of a decision-making process, but so much goes into, an access decision or, some kind of enablement decision. But the information is going to come from a lot of different areas. Identity is a critical area, but it is one of many. And I think one of the things that gets very complicated for people is, we talk about the industry. I think even some of the questions that we wrote in advance, we were talking about the industry. And my question was, what's the industry? What is it? It's not just identity, right? If you want to put it that way, every single company that has an online presence or uses computers is an identity company. It almost makes the term the industry meaningless. We do have subject matter experts, but if they only look at it from their point of view as to identity being the control or the enablement or anything, you've missed out on all the other things that actually end up going into decisions being made. And that's going to be a really big problem now we get to my soapbox part. That's going to be a really big problem when you actually start using AI to help speed up your decisions. Because one of the things that we know about AI is that it's not generally a deterministic system. It's not a binary system. It's going to probably take information and usually make the same choices each time, but not necessarily. So a lot of our thinking about the binary, of course, if identity says yes or identity says no, then that's the end all be all. But I don't think that's the way it's going to be going forward. So that's something I think is important to think about.
That's pretty deep. I really like that answer about what is the industry. I remember in the 90s when I was first getting into networking, if I heard somebody talking about computers or operating systems, I got so excited. It's like, oh, there's one of my people. Like, we're in this computer world. And then in 2006, I went to digital identity world, and it was like, holy cow, this, to me, that was the industry. That was the digital, or let's call it the IAM industry at the time. And what I loved about it was it just wasn't about the zeros and ones. And it wasn't even just about like, how does this make your business better? It was the philosophy of what is an identity. Um, I still think that element exists, that thread exists within the community or the industry. I kind of feel like the industry is really comes to bear when you talk about these conferences, right? Not everybody can go to the conferences. I get that, but it is a representation of people who consider themselves in the identity industry. But I also feel like potentially we're always getting better, right? And like every year, it seems like, hey, major milestones. So some of those things that we're talking about now, we might have been talking about a year ago. I'm wondering, like, and I'm going to ask you this question first, Heather, and then Andi, feel free to jump in, is what are we potentially as an industry underestimating now about the importance of identity?
I think we're underestimating the long tail. When you come to Identiverse or Authenticate or EIC, any of the RSA, any of the tier 1 conferences, you're looking at people who are thinking about, what's possible today and where are we trying to go and what's most urgent to do. And, it's a very immediate kind of thing. However, there are industries, and I'm going to point to scholarly publishing. Scholarly publishing is kind of an important industry if you think about it, right? It's about how people are where research goes, where education goes. It's all there, and they're still struggling with the concept of, can they use federation, or do they need to just stick with their local accounts, username, and passwords? The long tail in just that one group is pretty epic, and yet we don't talk about them anymore because that's so 15 years ago. The long tail is getting longer. And we, as identity professionals, don't want to talk about that anymore because solving that problem isn't a technical problem. It's a business problem. It's a social problem. And I think that's what in not talking about it, we kind of forget about it. And I think that will bite us in the butt at some point.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with that. I'm going to come at this from a slightly different perspective, which basically means I'm going to ask a different question. And it's the question is more something that I think the industry and the profession is not thinking about. And again, by the time this actually goes out, I will have spoken about this publicly. One of the things that's happened over the course of, say, the last 3 or 4 years, slightly quietly, but it's suddenly become really obvious, is that non-human access to things, in other words, API requests of some kind, dramatically outnumber human requests for things. And yet, we are still, by and large, designing identity systems with the human access in mind. So I'm going to restate that a different way. We're designing, most of our work is designing for what is actually an edge case. Human access is the edge case. that's really worrying because it means that we're designing things kind of the wrong way for what identity is going to look like over the course of the next, say, 5 years. That isn't to say that designing for human access isn't important. Actually, I think it becomes more important in that case. It's a little bit like the conversations we've had about, making sure that people who are digitally excluded have ways of accessing digital systems. That's a conversation that we've had over the years, and it becomes increasingly important that over time. This is the same thing. And I think that the industry and the profession massively underestimate how much work needs to be done, how much needs to change to allow for that fact.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. So, I did want to talk a little bit about some of the subject matter that was discussed last year. I've always thought of identity and access management as identity management, access management. Access management for the old school was authentication and authorization, right? It wasn't like managing people's identity information or what they have access to. It was the authentication side. I think somebody changed the definition and forgot to inform everyone. So I'm still referring to it that way. But in quotations, it was authentication is done. We talked about this last year. I think what we mean is authentication was solved. In other words, like the progress in that area is so incremental. I think with agentic identity, that makes you question that. Like, is it okay? Maybe we solve for people, maybe it's only incremental for people, but our problem is a lot more about non-people. So, Andi, what are your thoughts there when someone says authentication is solved?
Yeah. So I think, when we started to throw that phrase around, I think we particularly had in mind that the passkey construct really is very solid. And yeah, there's, to pick up Heather's point about long tail, there's an enormous deployment effort still required. But as a solution to the historic problem, I think it's a very good one. And I'm not clearly the only person that thinks that. Um, I think you're right, Jim, that that work has to continue, right? Let's be clear. We shouldn't stop doing that. If you haven't deployed passkey yet, you'll still do. You should go do that, right? That's a priority. I think one of the things that sort of emerged out of Identiverse last year, and which we're absolutely going to be talking about this year, is the incredibly important role that the continuous identity architecture is going to play. And so that incorporates shared signals, zero standing privilege, a whole bunch of stuff around how authorization works in that context, and some of the new work that's going on there. All of these things kind of fit together, right? But that continuous architecture, which people are already starting to deploy, and we had talks about it last year, we'll have plenty more talks about it this year in terms of really practical things that people can and should be doing. It also provides is the wrong word. It also delivers an architecture that ties in very well to the emergence of digital identity wallets and verifiable credentials, and ways that those things, and other credential types, and ways that those things, I suspect, will be used over the course of the next, say, few years, to provide the information that's required for an authorization decision, whether that is a very coarse-grained, yep, you can have access, or whether it's a very fine-grained, you need to carry out this specific operation at this specific time, right? So I think that's kind of and it's a massive thing, right? It's not that getting passkey done was simple at all. Huge amount of work went into it, but it's kind of a constrained problem, right? This is not a constrained problem. It's much bigger than that. It's going to take longer, but I think that's where the work really needs to happen, from my perspective.
If you want to think of it as a purely technical problem, then sure, passkeys are great, and they have solved for the majority of authentication challenges. Though some of the work that needs to happen is like I've spoken to people who are like, yeah, I'm not convinced because they don't actually. We say passkeys as if it is just one thing, which it isn't. Right? You can actually have syncable passkeys. You can have hardware-based passkeys, and which you choose depends on the use cases that you're trying to solve for. There's like a whole decision tree that feeds up into, are you deploying passkeys? Well, if then else, blah, 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 blah. That always seems to be missing in a lot of the conversations. And I've been working on some text for a client to try and clean that up a little bit, to be a little bit more clear that yes, passkeys can solve your problems if you choose the right one for your risk, for your need, things like that. So I'm sure that's part of the conversations that need to be had. Authorization. Oh my gosh, I think we're pretty far away from solving that at this point, because authorization ties directly into delegation. And delegation, we still don't know how to do in a complete fashion. We do have OAuth for the win. Love OAuth. Don't love the fact that it doesn't handle chaining all that well. There's a lot of conversations about how to get there from here, but those are all still pretty, I don't want to say speculative. They're nascent, right? They're at their beginnings for all intents and purposes. So a whole lot of more work needs to happen there. Now, when you take that back to a conference like Identiverse attracts the people that are looking for, I have a problem now and I want to solve it now. What are the solutions out there now for me? And so some of these bigger picture things we're looking at of, well, these are problems they don't actually have solutions yet. They almost don't, they frustrate attendees. They're almost not ready for Identiverse yet, which is one of the reasons why there's a whole range of other conferences out there to look at okay, well, if this is what's happening now, what's happening in the 3 to 5 year range? What's happening in the 7+ year range? All of those are conversations that still need to happen.
Let me play the Debbie Downer, Jim McDonald card here, because we always say things are, well, I don't want to say things are not solved, right? I think there are varying degrees of the solution. And so I would say for the most part, yeah, authentication has probably been solved, but we're unsolving it almost in real time because of all the new challenges that we're seeing with agentic and AI, and how are we going to authenticate some of these things? And maybe it does take advantage of some of the things that we've learned from the human that we've been trying to solve authentication for. And so I feel like it's never like 100%. It's like, yeah, I think we're like 80% solved. And then some new thing comes along and says, oh, back to 20. We got to figure that out. And it's kind of like an equation that never quite comes into balance. And I don't know if it's just the way it's going to work. But I mean, you could take that same equation across really any part of identity. Authorization, I'm with you, Heather. I feel like we're much closer to 10%, 20% solved than we are to 80%, like on the whole. But there's always sort of a give and take. And I don't know, Heather, am I preaching to the choir for you? And then Andi, I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are and sort of that rebound that I'm pushing back towards.
Oh, absolutely. But I would, to be snarky, I'd say, Jeff, let me introduce you to the concept of job security. But more realistically, one of the things that I've told people and generally gets agreement is the identity industry is sticky. It's really sticky. Once you've touched on it, you kind of can't, we don't let you escape because there's so much to do. And so many, the problems that we think we're solving evolve over time, and new use cases come in, new capabilities come in, which is slightly different from just a new use case, right? It's a whole new capability, a whole new tool. How would you use it? So there's always going to be more to do, without a doubt.
I think you're right, Jeff. The sort of 2 steps forward, 1 step back kind of thing is
like doing the cha-cha.
Both true. There you go, and a little frustrating. And I think, Heather alluded to this, and it's something several of us have been thinking about probably for a couple of years now. Is this notion of time horizons? I've been thinking about it in the context really of the various conferences, but Ian Glazer has spoken about this in the context of, large enterprise, right? That that 1 to 3 year time frame, which really is, when Heather says a problem to solve, something to deploy now, right? It's for a large enterprise, that's kind of a 3 year time frame problem. And it's really important that we don't, in I guess, the concern of how do we solve for tomorrow's problems, even though some of those tomorrow's problems, especially the ones around, things like agentic AI, are really kind of today's problems, but we don't have solid solutions for them yet, right? It's really important that we don't lose sight of getting the work done now, even that will make things better, right? Safer, easier to use, more privacy preserving, whatever it might be, still needs to get done. And I think particularly now there is this huge risk that we end up not getting that stuff done. The long tail gets longer. You never catch up, right? That level of focus, I think, is really important. So all of that's to say, I kind of agree with you, Jeff. It's the nature of the beast, and we have to be careful about making sure that we get today's work done as well as thinking about tomorrow's solutions. Heather.
One of the things I say, I'm also a working group chair in a couple of different standards organizations. And one of the things that I really encourage people to think about for some of the specifications we write is, does this box us into a corner? Maybe it's okay to be boxed into a corner, but I want to be explicit. Does this box us into a corner in terms of closing doors for directions we can take? I think that's one of the best questions people can ask when they are looking at deploying some things for problems that aren't entirely solved. Go ahead and do that, but think about, does that make it harder to move in a direction that it looks like the industry is going to go if they ever, figure out how to do things?
And I'm guessing box quarter means right now, right? Because we don't know what's coming in the future. So you try to be extensible.
Well,
I think where you
yes and no. I mean, we know that delegation is a huge problem, right? So if you're deploying something that locks in how you do delegation in only one way, or that you've funded it so that, okay, we're going to do this, but now we won't be able to change anything for another 5 years. Do you really want to do that? Was that a good idea? Right? No, you don't know how it's going to do, but you kind of have to build in a certain level of flexibility and resilience because you have to solve the problem today, but the actual best practice hasn't been determined yet.
Andi, you want to say something?
Yeah, I was going to, float over the top of that and say, all of this requires tremendous leadership. And that isn't by saying that, in saying that, I don't mean good management. Also requires good management, right? But leadership comes from any level within an organization. And so as digital identity professionals, we need to think about, okay, how do we lead the organization to get the work done today? And how do we start to lead the organization to think about what's going to need to change over the course of the next 3 to 5 years? They aren't easy things to do, but at whatever level people are operating at, there's opportunities to start to drive those conversations, and it's really important as a profession and as an industry that we do that whenever we have the opportunity.
I think we've kind of hit one of the major themes here. I want to hear from you, Heather, from your role, right, as kind of seeing all these different calls for presentation. What are some of the topics that you think, other than what we've talked about so far, that you think are going to be kind of hits with the audience, things that you're interested in? And I'm curious if you had any surprises. Like, was there something that's like, oh, I hadn't thought about that? Or, maybe the calls for presentations were all focused on like a certain area. I'm guessing there was a lot of AI, but
so much AI.
a certain area that you weren't expecting maybe.
So I think what I expected to see a little more of and didn't get was more about fraud. And I think that's something I'm going to push on for next year, is I really would like more about how fraud comes into the world of identity. A lot of times we talk about IAM, identity and access management. Great. It's a very useful thing to talk about. The payments side of things, which relies heavily on identity, thinks it's a whole different field. And it is at the moment. It has been for a long time, but it's kind of bigger than IAM is. I want to see more convergence there. I want to see those discussions about fraud coming in and the people who have IAM on the brain think a little bit more about, well, yes, but there's actually a whole nother field that has been working on this and has solutions for it and is trying to build better solutions for it, that we shouldn't be two fields, we should be one. So there was that. I didn't see as much of that as I wanted to. I also didn't see as much as I expected on, yes, identity proofing and verification. There was a bit on deepfakes. I'm like, yes. Besides that, that's actually a really big critical field. What can we talk about that isn't deepfakes? There is a whole lot more about how to do this, about the accessibility of it, about what devices you can use, about whether biometrics work. That I thought could. We ended up like trying to chase some people down, saying, "I think you really need to talk about this." So that's what I would put in.
I would agree with all of that. I'm going to throw an extra one in, which is, it's a few years ago now. I want to say it was the year that we were entirely virtual, in one of the COVID years, and we had a focus that year specifically on usability. And particularly given the context of Passkey, I was actually kind of surprised that we had very little that talked about the user flow, the user experience, all of that, right? It's such a critical part of what we do. And there's lots of really, really interesting work going on. There's also some really bad examples, or I should say some examples of very poor usability. And in some cases, it's not only poor usability, it's also marginally arguable as poor security. And I feel like that's an area that would be interesting. That it was lacking this year, right? We've got some, but it would be nice to start to see a little more of that.
One topic I think could be really interesting, and to kind of go back to my 2006 digital identity world point that I was making about it, kind of having a philosophical thread to the identity industry. And you guys rightly pointed out, so all the stuff I was bringing up is like identity as a control plane is really just thinking about identity as security. But here's what I kind of run into is that I think organizations, you have a balance of wanting to enable the users to be creative, and maybe they are AI whizzes and can create agents and publish them to the organization. And let's assume you have a pretty large organization. But then you have the counterbalance, which is we need to govern this thing, and we need to make sure that people don't just start publishing a bunch of agents. So I don't know. To me, that is where this hits the road, or where the rubber hits the road, is somebody's got to set up the identities and allow them to publish the agents. So I guess my follow-up is, how do you handle that balance? And I think that would be a good topic for people to present on. What do you think?
That's not an identity problem.
You don't think it's an identity problem?
No,
it's not really a core identity, but it is access, isn't it?
I think it's a governance problem. I mean, the first question you asked, should they be able to do this? That's not an identity problem. Should they be able to do this? That's about business risk, right? That's about IP. That's about all sorts of different things. You've got to get through a whole mass of stuff before you actually get to the technical question of how do you enable the systems to identify who's trying to do it, what they're trying to do, what access it has, how much you can delegate to it. Those are great problems. But you got to get to the are you even allowed first? And that's not technical.
Who's talking about it, though? And
that's a good question.
What ends up happening? Who has to make those decisions in an organization? Well, I kind of feel like it keeps coming back to...
That's a good conversation. But that's where I think you have that with your CISOs, you have it with your business people. I would love to have them at Identiverse, because I know a lot of identity people are just desperate for, would our business people please give us direction?
It is interesting. I mean, and specifically in the context of AI, this is interesting because that area is moving so very, very, very quickly. And it's poorly understood, even amongst, let's call them technically capable people who might just not be specifically working in the field of AI, right? There's plenty of misapprehension, miscomprehension to go around, even amongst technical folks. Once you start to get outside of the realms of the technical, people have all sorts of fascinating ideas about what this new magic is going to let them do. And that doesn't help with that conversation, right? Because people don't know at the executive level. They don't know what they don't know. They're asking, in many cases, the wrong questions. I've sat in on in an entirely different sphere to this. I've sat in on a couple of kind of board level conversations about how do we think about AI in large multinational organizations. Some of those conversations are really positive and helpful and good, and you kind of get the sense that people are doing the work to understand what this really means to the business. In other cases, they're just scrambling because they feel like they have to keep up, and do something. In a lot of cases, what's happening is that they're not thinking about that policy question that you raised, Jim. Right? They're just going, "Yeah, we need to do this. Make it so." And nobody ever defines this. Right? I mean, it's like it's problematic. So yeah, I mean, there are ways, I think, as an industry and a profession, that where we can engage in those conversations to try and help. But it's in the ALA context specifically, it's really, really difficult right now.
Yeah, it's about publishing the agents, but then even what the agents can do. And I think that if you look at it at the surface level, people think, oh, well, you know, Heather accessing my agent, it uses Heather's capabilities, her entitlements and her access. But the problem is the agent has 24/7 is operating in the background, scraping data, doing all kinds of things. So what identity is being used for that? But then can people publish agents? I think we're at kind of an inflection moment, which is, organizations are going to have to decide, like, what rights do they allow their people to have to build agents? Are they going to restrict it? Or is this something that they're going to say, take an entrepreneurial approach to? And I don't think we're going to solve that today. But I think and feel free to follow up, Andy, but I think that one of the points was made by Heather was, these are the hallway conversations that happen at Identiverse. To me, it's the in-person conversations at conferences that make conferences worth getting on a plane and sleeping in a hotel worth it, right? It's the in-person conversations. I know that Identiverse has a lot of workshops and networking events lined up. Can you talk a little bit about that, Andy? And feel free to address my last point and then go into answering the question.
Yeah, no, you're right. We should talk about those things, and I'm smiling because I'm remembering an observation. I was having a conversation with a couple of folks about the impact that AI might have on various different industries. And I think, one of the questions that a lot of organizations don't ask at the moment is not just, the thing you were getting to, Jim, which is, okay, what can we do with it? What is possible, and how should we enable that? But the question that comes first is, why are we doing this, right? How does it benefit the business to us doing this? How do we improve the business by deploying? That's where organizations have to start. And again, to Heather's point, that's not an identity problem, right? That comes before we get stuck in. But we should go and try and be part of those conversations if we can. So I was having actually a very similar conversation to this with a couple of folks, and we talked through this, and we were starting to talk about what impact do we think AI is going to have on different events? And we started to talk about content in particular, and some of the challenges around, AI generated material, and, it's a very clever predictive text engine and all of those things. And it occurred to me, and I said it, and everyone went quiet and then nodded, which is what I'm hoping is going to happen here, is I actually think that AI is tremendously beneficial for the events business. And the reason I think that, Jim, is because people actually want to know that they're talking to a real person. And the best place to do that is at a conference. So I don't know whether that's true, but I mean, I think the statement is true. Whether it actually helps the events business as a whole or not, I don't know. Right? That's outside of my sphere of expertise. But it's a reasonable conjecture, and I do think that's something that we've always done very successfully at Identiverse. Is even for folks who are coming for the first time, even for folks who are relatively new to the industry or the profession, it is. I like to think, and I hear from other people, it's hard for me not to be biased at this point, but we try very hard to make it a very welcoming, open kind of a place, right? We really encourage people to go and have those conversations and know that, if somebody's presented on a topic and then you see them a little later, feel free to go and gently start asking them some questions. I recommend not doing that immediately as they come off stage, right? Give people a chance to breathe. It can be nerve-wracking to present to an audience of your peers, even if you do it frequently. Standing up in front of a couple hundred people in a room and talking about, a subject that you know inside out, but you know that there are people in that audience who probably know it as well. It's nerve-wracking, and I have a huge amount of respect for everybody that helps to do that every year. So give people a moment, right, as they come off stage. But go and have those conversations. And as you say, there are a number of things that we do at the event and that CRA, helps to put on around the event to help with that. Lots of networking opportunities, lots of stuff going on in the expo hall, some of which is put on by the sponsors as well. We will have at the very beginning of the week, as we always do, we'll have a session specifically for newcomers. Really recommend that folks go to that, especially if it's their first time. Lots of really good information about how to navigate the week. And there's a number of other kind of community-oriented things that are happening, through the course of the week. Heather, I know you've got a couple that you're picking up as well. So.
Mm-hmm. Yep. There's a Women at Identiverse side meeting on Tuesday. It's actually open to anyone, but that's from like 2 to 5 and has some interesting panels and discussions that will be happening. The hallway conversations are great, and one of the reasons I like the sessions is because that helps you identify, 30 to 100 other people that were interested in the same thing. And maybe you don't want to like leap on the poor speaker as they come off the stage, but you'll look at, well, who was actually asking questions in the audience? Those are people you can go talk to. I will say, in terms of how AI has impacted the events industry, though, is if I was queen of the universe, I am absolutely going to limit how many proposals any one person could submit, because it got crazy pants. And you could tell, it's like one person I think was close to 20 submissions. And I'm very, I'm grateful that they were that engaged and that interested. But for the love of Pete, could you focus?
Wait a
You
second.
should have just accepted them all.
Yes, and then he would have to talk in parallel.
Yeah, just
malicious compliance. I love it. So one person submitted 20 different talks?
Yeah.
All on AI or different?
No, but you could tell that they were, he used AI to help them generate the proposal. That's the part that I see most immediately, is how AI is helping with people submitting to the CFP.
Well, the answer to AI is more AI. So you've got AI submitting proposals. Now you need an AI to judge and remove proposals.
So we don't have time to get on this, because I suspect that Heather and I are going to share a soapbox at this point. But just very briefly, how irritating is it that, because most LLMs are trained on a volume of literature and high quality writing, that we're now using high quality writing as the thing to tell us if it was written by AI, right? Like, there's a reason the M- exists. And some of us have been using it for a really long time. Likewise, the semicolon. Likewise, long words and complicated sentence constructions that never seem to get to the end, like this one. There's a reason those things exist. They exist in academic literature, and some of us can do that. Anyway, I'll get off my little soapbox now.
There
the answer now is
there are studies.
I think like an instruction set that's
but there
purposely make mine, have misspellings or occasional improper grammar.
No, give me the soapbox. I want it.
Okay.
There are actually studies now about how the fact that AI has this pattern of language is impacting how people are speaking and writing. it's, there is only a brief window where we can look at something and go, okay, so obviously AI, because people are adapting to AI at least as much as AI is adapting to what people say.
Which,
You're absolutely right, Heather. I
academically,
should have picked up on that, and I will take that into consideration on my next question. All right, let's start to close out because we're running a little bit long, but I want to talk about not this year, but next year. Are there any sneak peeks or ideas that you think of topics, and Heather, I'll start with you, of things that you think are going to be topics of conversation at next year's Identiverse? Time to put on that hat that says, here's the future.
Well, I am going to come back to the topic of fraud. I definitely want to see that in there. I know people want to hear about AI. I'll think about ways to make that more specific. I do think I'm going to pull apart. Right now we have consumer, citizen, and customer in one track. We might start pulling that apart because I think there's now certainly enough interesting stuff happening in the government space that it may need its own dedicated area of conversation. It's going to be, I'm willing to bet it's going to be a bigger event next year. So we're going to probably have more tracks as a result because there is more to say in the space.
Andi, what do you think?
I agree with all of that, including it's going to be a bigger event. I mean, look, we're going to be close on 4,000 people this year. We're going to be close on 200 sponsors and supporters. And I mean, it's really big, and it's just going to get bigger because the industry and the profession is getting bigger, because identity is so fundamental to everything that happens. I don't want to get too far ahead of where I think we might be heading directionally. But I mentioned it, kind of at the top of the conversation, or at least near to it. The importance of how we continue to think about the user experience, I think, is something that is increasingly important and gets progressively less solid coverage. And I think there's a lot to think about there, particularly as we start to design around a bunch of non-human actors, right? And as you start to think about continuous architecture and where do wallets and verifiable credentials and other credential types fit into all of that, there are a bunch of really big questions to start asking. Some of them have good answers already, some of them don't. But I do think that feels to me like a direction the industry needs to have in mind, at least. And I should have prefaced this by saying this is all highly speculative, right? It may very well be that you ask me this question again, come the end of Identiverse, and I'll be like, no, Jeff, no, we're going to talk about something completely that isn't this. We're gonna, oh, I don't know, let's think of something really outlandish. We're going to start talking about the use of Prolog in building identity systems. I think that's unlikely, by the way, but
I thought you were going to mention the password is dead again for the 40th year in a row.
Yeah.
So if we had to come up with a theme song for Identiverse, what would you pick? I've asked this question a couple times from some kind of recent events like Identity Management Day and things like that. Andi, let me start with you. What is your theme song for Identiverse 2026?
I had a whole thought process here, so you're just gonna have to give me a minute, right? So I started out with the theme tune from 2001: A Space Odyssey, right? Which is Also sprach Zarathustra. It's that big kind of thing. Which there's a point in the event planning cycle where it really feels like dun 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 like that, right? Then I'm like, okay, but we're also in this really complicated bit where there's a lot to organize, and so maybe some kind of really avant-garde conceptual jazz thing. Most of those songs don't have real titles; they're just things in their own right? Then Heather mentioned earlier on when we were talking, she said about the biometrics and the deepfakes, and I remember there's a brilliant Weird Al Yankovic song, "I Think I'm a Clone Now," which struck me as potentially appropriate. And my head kind of went to Queen, the show must go on. But where I landed was Robbie Williams, "Let Me Entertain You," because that's really what it's about.
That's a good one. Heather, you got one?
I do. And it's funny. I think Andi and I's thought processes started about the same way and then just went spring. for me, I'm choosing Bohemian Rhapsody, Queen, because the sheer level of orchestration and excitement and complexity and whatnot that come together to make that song just an amazing classic is what I like to see out of Identiverse.
And everybody loves that song. I don't know
And
anybody who does not like that.
If they don't
Jim,
like
what's
it, they're
yours?
probably not my people. So
True.
sorry.
And you know what? I support that as well. If you're not a Bohemian Rhapsody fan, also you're probably not my people. So I'm with you, Heather. Jim, what's your song of choice?
I'm going to go a little bit further back. So Beach Boys, I Get Around. And, that song goes, round, round, get around, I get around. And basically, those are the lyrics for almost the entire song. But there are a couple verses. So I'm going to read you one of the verses. I'm getting bugged driving up and down the same old strip, Las Vegas strip. I got to find a new place where the kids are hip. Identiverse is where the kids are hip. My buddies and me are getting real well known. Yeah, the bad guys know us and they leave us alone.
That's very
good.
aspirational, Jim. I like it.
I'm glad you said that one because a couple things. One, it's a great song choice. Two, I now have yet another clip of you kind of singing that I can add to my, reel of things that I can use to, slightly embarrass you, but also promote your singing talent, which is very good, by the way.
I wish we didn't have to worry about strikes because then you could do like an outro of like the real version of the song playing and people are like, oh my God, Jim, you're so bad. But I think everyone knows that song, almost everyone. And they're probably like, oh my God, Jim, you are so bad. Denise's brother was at our house not that long ago. And he's like, well, Denise and he were in the basement and he heard me singing something. He's like, what's going on? She's like, oh, Jim is singing. He's like, that's how he sings. So there you go. Jeff, what's your song?
I took it. I can't be serious about any of these stuff that we typically do in kind of like our lighter note. So mine is "You Can't Touch This" by MC Hammer. It has a little bit of a security, identity ting to it, but yeah, you can't touch this. Can't go wrong with that. Again, great song. And if you don't like that song, you're probably not one of my people either. So "You Can't Touch This" and Bohemian Rhapsody. I'm with you on both of those things. So I think that's a good spot. We'll think of other songs. I'm sure if other people have their own songs, hey, let's pick up on, Jim's challenge to put more comments on the YouTube. So, what are your theme songs for Identiverse? Either put it here on YouTube or put it on the LinkedIn post, whenever this goes live, right? Things like that. So this is one of my favorite conferences to attend of the year. And, I will throw in a plug, right? One of the many sessions that'll be out there. If you're not in a session, come see us in the Expo Hall floor. We'll be recording some podcasts, but we're also doing our Majority Rules game show. And if you've been fortunate enough to be part of that, how much fun that can be for the audience. And we'll have some great prizes, I think, for that as well, too. So hopefully you can come check it out. I don't know when exactly it's going to take place, but, we'll be there doing that. I want to ask you real quickly, Heather, because we're kind of running short on time. You do a lot of work around a lot of conferences. I think you said something like 40% of your year is like attending these things.
Mm-hmm.
How do you keep track of that? And tell me more. I know how you do, because that's going to set you up for the website that you got on GitHub.
So anyone who knows me's going to laugh about what I'm going to say. How do I do that? I have a list. I love lists. Lists are the best thing that humanity has ever invented. And but this particular list I've been keeping since 2023. It's actually on GitHub. One of the community groups that I run in the W3C asked me that question back in like 2023. Wait, you keep going to these events and we only just hear about them at the last minute. Could you write them down? And thus I started tracking all of the identity and identity adjacent conferences that I was aware of that were more than, a day. So they had to be at least 2 days and weren't vendor conferences. So they weren't like the Amazon or the SailPoint or Octane or anything like that. They actually, at least some level of vendor neutrality and 2 days or more anywhere in the world. English doesn't have to be the main spoken language, though. That tends to be what I hear about. So I have that list and I think we're going to put it in the show notes. And I've already started populating 2027. There's over a dozen conferences listed there for next year already.
There is something in the world for everybody to attend. I feel like it's such a great list. I've used it in the past. Definitely have a link in our show notes. It's a very long GitHub link. And so I feel like there's an opportunity to do like a short URL, something or other, and just kind of direct it at that. I don't know. that might make it easier. Maybe put it on, your website for Spherical Cow or something like that.
I could put it next to. So I have on my website is the where am I going to speak, which is not the full list because I can only be in one place at one time. But I may put just a pointer to, okay, but where's the actual full list that I'm aware of?
So with all these conferences, is there do you even pick up swag items anymore? Or is it I'm not going to grab that and it will, do something else and okay. Or is there something you seek out for everything?
Okay, so mostly, I live in a very small house, and I have a rule that something can't come into the house unless I know how it's getting out of the house. So I have to know how to dispose of it, and I have to know where I'm going to put it. So I can tell you right now, no more t-shirts. I have got no room for t-shirts. The t-shirt drawer is full, and we're done. I will potentially bring in socks because you wear through socks and then you get rid of them, but I want them to be really good socks because I get very cold feet. And anything else like fidget spinners, why? Why does a fidget spinner exist? I don't know. I don't need it. I was tempted by some of the interesting coffee paraphernalia, but otherwise, meh. It's very much about what do I even have room for at this point, and is it really, really interesting?
Well, it has to be somewhat packable too, right? You can't have a big box.
Yes and no. I mean, I'm one of those people that I actually do always have to check a bag because since I've got some food allergies, I'm always packing food in. And if I'm going to pack food in, I may as well pack a bottle of whiskey or something. so I usually have a checked bag, and that's fine.
A checked bag just for the whiskey. I love that.
But Heather, also not just whiskey, it's got to be scotch, right?
Yes, it does have to be scotch for me.
We had this discussion in the past.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of bourbon. Just not.
I'm not agreeing with you or anything. I'm just
I get it.
specifying.
Yes.
You like a good PT scotch.
No, I'm actually open-minded. I like both peated and not peated. For me, it's more a question of when are you drinking it in the day? Because I'm not going to start a day with peated scotch. That's just a little too much.
Not going to have a fifth of scotch to start the day at Identiverse?
Not to start the day, but ask me at noon on Thursday.
It's Vegas. How do you define start and end? Right, time is like a meaningless construct in the constraints of Vegas.
So that's fair, but in the context of Identiverse, and especially where we've got main stage responsibilities, the start is about 2 hours before main stage opens, and the end is when I go to bed at the end of the day.
Andi, are you a swag guy? Do you pick up stuff? Are there things that you're yeah, I've seen enough of that, or is there something you seek out? I know socks are popular, so I'm Heather, I get it. But something like that.
So the honest answer is no, but some of that is just circumstantial, right? As you say, been to enough of these things, it's hey, look, it's another thing to put some liquid in, or another travel adapter that will break after 3 days, or finding a thing that actually genuinely has value over time and is useful that I don't already have is kind of hard. There's also practical reality though too, which is I particularly at Identiverse, but actually at most of the other conferences that I go to as well, I don't get to the show floor very much, right? I'm usually busy doing other stuff, and so usually by the time I get there, it's the end of the week and all the stuff's gone anyways. My kids are unimpressed, but they're also old enough now to, just get over it. So.
I feel there's an opportunity here to have some sort of little mini shrine of gifts from vendors to put outside of the speaker prep room or something like that for all the people who can't get out there. It's hey, that's maybe it's illegal. I don't know. I don't want to get anyone in trouble, but why not? Is that a problem, Andi? If I just encourage a bunch of people to do the wrong thing?
So I think, no, I'm sure you didn't. I think if it were organized, then actually it could be a really smart thing. And the reason I went quiet is I was making a note to mention it to somebody because I think it's a really smart idea. But programmatically, right? I think you want to organize that rather than just have it kind of guerrilla style. But yeah.
Let's make it like the Oscars or the Emmys. The Emmys, right, where you have a gift bag, and it's
right.
Instead of perfume and chocolates and other things, it's oh, here is a discount code for 6 months of free SaaS something or other, right?
Yeah,
I think that would be kind of a cool idea.
I mean, we try and get people to the speaker ready room at least once to review their stuff. We can have a lovely little altar of things to sort of encourage them.
We'll donate a sticker for IDAC. How about that, Jim?
I mean, we've been doing the stickers for a long time now, Jeff. I think maybe we should update our IDAC approach to swag. Maybe we need IDAC socks. I don't know. But what I would like to do, right, is put the challenge out there for folks to comment on the YouTube video and let us know what IDAC swag they would like. Me personally, I usually go for the socks. I always figure even if I wear them once or twice and throw them away, which I usually don't, as long as they're holding up. The thing that I don't really like is like you go by a vendor booth and they've got like the Death Star Lego set, and I'm like, oh, I want that so bad. But it's like I'm not going to buy their product, and I, don't feel appropriate even signing up for the contest to win that thing. So I'll just let that go and take the socks.
Somebody has to pack up all that stuff. And so the more that the vendors can give away, the better. There's times where it's like, okay, well, I have like 500 or something, right? And it's like, you gave away maybe 300, but you still have like 2 boxes full of like stuff. And don't ever feel bad about going to the vendors, check them out, whatever, right? That, definitely want to do that, but never feel bad about grabbing swag, because I find a lot of stuff in dumpsters and in garbage afterwards. If people don't take it, sometimes it just goes to waste, which is a real shame. If you think you're going to put it to use, go for it. Grab it. Grab the 48th, USB to Lightning adapter that we will no longer need in, 3 months, for all the people who switched over, that port on their iPhones, that kind of thing.
That reminds me of a story. So one of the firms that you and I worked out together called Identiverse, one year, Jeff Chang was responsible for coming up with the swag. He bought 500 of these. Basically, they were like long-term solo cups. They look like a regular solo cup, but they could be washed in the dishwasher or whatever. I think we gave away like 3 of them. And at the end, I was like, well, what do we do with these other 497 solo cups? Like, I don't know. I'm not taking them home. You can throw them out. I'm like, I can't throw them out. That's not the way I was raised. So I had them shipped back to my house. Dude, I kept them in my garage. I probably used like 7 of them. Eventually, like 15 years later, threw out the other 490 solo cups.
That was a way, man, if you had red solo cups, just go to the nearest, university fraternity and hand them out. They would love that.
They weren't red, they were orange.
Right, Identiverse orange, which were great. They were like very like,
it's still a take. They would love that. Guaranteed.
Yeah, I should have talked to you first, but I didn't. I had to clean out.
I had to
clean out my garage, and I was like, "Sorry, guys, it's time to." I tried. My heart was in the right place, but then I had to clean my garage, and then, well,
and then your heart was no longer in the right place.
It was no longer in the right place.
All right, let's go ahead and wrap it up for this week. I'm looking forward to seeing you both here at Identiverse. That's going to be a lot of fun. And let's see what else. A bunch of links in our show notes, probably to collect the Identiverse link, our discounts, our LinkedIns for all of us. Heather, does this have a name other than just like list of conferences for IM?
Yeah, but as you said, it's a pretty long name. It's the 2027 list of identity and related conferences and standard development events.
Okay, we need some AI to help with the marketing on that. But I have a link for that in our show notes as well for people to check out. I use it. Thank you so much for putting it together. It's very handy for me, to kind of figure out, okay, like what do we have going on and what are the ones that I can try to get to and things like that. But definitely appreciate both of you guys' time. We'll go ahead and leave it there for this week. Thanks everyone for watching and listening. We'll see you at Identiverse and talk with you all in the next one.
You've been listening to Identity at the Center. We hope you've enjoyed the show. Make sure to like, rate, and review. And we'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hit the website at identityatthecenter.com. See you next time on Identity at the Center.